Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. I'm joined with me today by a very, very special guest. He's been kind enough to take time out of his day to meet with us, Bulls fans. Three-time NBA champion, member of the Chicago Bulls' first three-peat. Now you know him as the Bulls TV color commentator, host of the Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast, founder of the Give Me the Hot Sauce brand, by the way, which is actually really good stuff. You should check it out. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, Stacey King. Stacey, how are we doing, sir? Appreciate you making the time.
Hey, always a pleasure, man. You're one of my favorite, one of my favorite podcasters out there and vloggers, as they call them. So it's always a pleasure to come on the show.
Appreciate it, man. Of course, I'm sure all of you are already by now. But if you're not, be sure to give Stacey a follow at Stacey21King. Be sure to check out the great work of him and his crew that they've been doing on the Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast. I'll leave all of that linked down in the description below. Stacey, we'll talk about the Bulls, the offseason, the upcoming season expectations, all that good stuff. But actually, where I wanted to start was a recent episode you guys did on your podcast with the legend, your former teammate, Scottie Pippen. The pod got a lot of buzz, really because of some of the things Scottie had said in that appearance. You know, I put a reaction video on that actually, and it blew up too. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that people were somewhat taken aback by what he had to say regarding Michael Jordan. Now, of course, some people, made edits of the clip, taking his words out of context, which isn't fair to, Scottie and reality of what he was actually saying. He was just speaking his truth and what he remembers from that time, all playing together in the 90s. But regardless, he had some pretty harsh things to say about Mike. And so I guess as someone who played with these guys all of those years ago, you're friends with these guys, does it sadden you a bit to see what, most consider to be one of the greatest duos in NBA history to have come to this where they're not even on speaking terms?
Well, it's very difficult because these are family members. These are your brothers.
Right.
And, like in real life, brothers fight. Sometimes brothers go years without talking. But at the end of the day, you find some kind of common ground to reunite. Hopefully they'll be able to do that because, they're part of something that's special. We're history. Chicago Bulls championship teams will go down as some of the greatest championship teams in the history of NBA. So you'd like to see those guys work out their differences and be able to put it to the side. I know Scottie took a lot of heat for what he said, but if you know Scottie like I do and like his teammates do, Scottie speaks from the heart. Sometimes people may not get what he's trying to say and may take it out of context, which I saw a lot of people doing. But I knew exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah. You obviously I don't want to, minimize what Scottie was saying and just chalk it up to, oh, Scottie's crazy, like a lot of people are saying. But for me, I was thinking sort of beyond just the things that he was saying about Jordan, and more so, what is Scottie going through? Why is he doing this years later, right? Grudges should be squashed when you're at his age instead of burning bridges and things like that. And so I got to thinking, is maybe Scottie's hurting. His son recently passed. He's going through a divorce. I'm sure it doesn't help that Mike, his son is dating his ex-wife. But should we be worried about Scottie? Someone, you're friends with him. Is it concerning at all based on just, some of the stuff that he was saying?
No, I'm not concerned about Scottie. He had his full faculties.
Right.
He's gone through a lot of stuff. He's, his son passing away. That alone, a parent going through that, no parent should go through that. You should be the other way around. Parents are supposed to go before the kids do. So you got to understand, Scottie up until that point, the Last Dance kind of started Scottie's way towards speaking his mind. A lot of times you don't know what goes on behind the scenes like we do. A lot of times, what goes on in the locker room stays in the locker room. That's the code that you have as an NBA player, NFL player, Major League Baseball player, hockey, doesn't matter, high school, college. What goes on in the locker room stays in the locker room. And I think Scottie looked at that Last Dance and found himself, looked at himself being painted in the wrong light, by looking as being selfish, waiting to have surgery on his back. And then having Michael being the one saying that. It wasn't like Phil Jackson said it. It was Michael Jordan who said it. And when you have a guy that you've been defending, your whole career, and basically putting him on a pedestal, saying he's the greatest player, and you've been speaking high praise of him, and you've never said a bad word about him up until that point. and then you start to see The Last Dance, and then you start to see yourself being painted in a light that doesn't look good. It makes you look like you're selfish. You didn't care about your teammates.
Right.
You were mad about money. What they put the 1.8 seconds in the clip. And it just, if people looked at it in that perspective, instead of looking at it as like, oh, Scottie's just jealous, Scottie's this, Scottie's that, you put yourself in that same situation. Here's a guy that you've done nothing but put on a pedestal your whole career and saying, hey, it was an honor for me playing with Michael Jordan, and being, accepting that second fiddle role and still being considered one of the top, 75 players, 100 players in the game. And then you see the very guy that you talking good about, talking bad about you and saying things that, that he feels that hurt him. And that's why I think people lose sight of what Scottie's going through on that part. They don't look at it that way. They don't look at it how he took The Last Dance and how he was portrayed in The Last Dance. They're looking at, oh, well, his son's dating his wife, and, oh, Scottie's drinking and all this stuff. But his teammates know. I mean, that really hurt Scottie. The Last Dance really hurt Scottie. And it hurt a lot of guys. I mean, think about Scott Burrell. Think about Scott Burrell in that video. No one's talking about how he was portrayed in that video. Right. That could a guy like that, if he's not a strong personality and a strong person that can handle that kind of stuff, think about where he could be right now. Everybody knows Michael Jordan victimized you, beat you up, and treated you like dirt. I mean, come on, man. That stuff doesn't need to go on the film, and he could have the same feeling Scottie has.
Do you think that there's a possibility they will eventually make amends?
I hope so. I think, we're too old, guys are too old to be having these vendettas, being vindictive. I mean, listen, I didn't like the Pistons when we played, and that carried over for years. And then now I'm friends with the guys. I'm friends with, Lampier. I'm friends with, guys that we actually hated. You put that stuff behind you because it was the competitive nature of the game. And that's what the game at that particular time made you do. You were kind of forced into that. You were kind of brought into that environment, but you can't hold on to hate, for the rest of your life, man. I mean, you should be enjoying life right now. And hopefully, those guys put that stuff behind them. They shake hands, apologize to one another, and keep it moving, man. Keep it moving and live a long and productive, happy life.
I mean, as Bulls fans, we would love to see that, right? It's the at least for me anyway, that was my childhood. They're the ones that got me into basketball, that early 90s team, the team that you were a part of. And you want to see those guys, make amends, be friends again. And, obviously we're not going to ever understand the full perspective of everything that went on during that time. And then also what came after it with The Last Dance. But that's what I'm hoping for. But I do appreciate, the candid nature of that interview that you had with Scottie, and the fact that you allowed him to speak freely and not, cutting him down or holding him back, or, even though people knew they wouldn't agree with what he was saying necessarily, but it was a great episode. For those watching, by the way, if you haven't had the chance to check it out, I'll make sure it's linked below in the description.
Well, Jamal, one of the things is when you get in this business and you're doing podcasts, this because you're doing a podcast, you provide a safe environment for your guests to come on and be able to speak their truth, or be able to speak their mind. That's why you bring them on the show. It's not my job to cut Scottie off and debate with him on his feelings. You know what I'm saying? I had Phil Jackson on the week before. Phil got to say what he wanted to say. I didn't have to feel like I had to debate with them because they're family members. You know what I'm saying? Now, if I brought Donald Trump on, I would debate with him. There's certain guys that you would debate with that you bring on your show. But when you're bringing family members and these guys are my brothers, they're coming on my show because it's a safe environment and they feel they're safe. They're not going to get, attacked. If you go back and you look at that interview I had with LeVar Ball, one of the things he said was, this is a great podcast. He said, I felt like, I felt coming on here, I didn't feel like I was being attacked or ambushed, and I'm definitely going to come back. And that's what you want to hear as a guy who hosts your show. You want guys to come back on your show, and you want them to say, hey, look, I had such a great time. I'm coming back, on Give Me the Hot Sauce podcast, or I'm coming back on Bull Central, whatever. You want them to have that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Otherwise, why are they going to come back if you're just
exactly? Because you're a jerk. If you're a jerk, they're like, I'm never coming back.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And if anybody who sees that, because you got other people, other basketball players, other high profile guests. If they come on and feel like, hey, wait, I saw what he did to LeVar Ball. I saw what he did to Scottie Pippen.
Right.
Like, I'm not coming on there. The guy's, sucker punching people on there. I'm not going to do that. It's not my job. And when you come on a podcast or you come on a TV, radio interview, that's that person's chance to be able to say what they have to say. You may not agree with it, but you have to respect it. And you have to respect the host giving that person that venue to talk and say what they want to say.
For sure. The other thing I wanted to talk about, I might ramble on a little bit here, but we're coming up into the upcoming season. We all saw the Bulls lose in the final playing game. Game was pretty close throughout most of it. In fact, it looked like the Bulls were potentially going to win. And then Jimmy Butler took over, as Jimmy does. He gets buckets, the term you coined. And then, of course, the Miami Heat, they go on this incredible playoff run where they go all the way to the finals. It's the 8th seed. And of course, when that happens, it resurfaces on social media. Hey, the Bulls, they had Jimmy Butler. They had this guy. They let him go. What a horrible trade that was when they could have just built around him. I don't really want to bring up the trade itself because I actually think, if most people would probably take it back, they could, right? I would. I love Jimmy, and I was livid when the Bulls traded him at that time. I thought it was a mistake. But the reason I wanted to bring this up and ask you about it is because I tweeted about this during the playoff run when everyone was talking about this, and I got a lot of backlash for it from Bulls fans. I was talking about how, yes, in hindsight, trading Jimmy Butler was a mistake, and they would have been better off just building around him, right? We can look at that now and sure, say that. But let's also not forget that towards the end of Jimmy's time in Chicago, it wasn't all hugs and kisses. Now, I'm only saying this based on my own perception of what I saw on the court, just watching the games as a fan, his body language, the interviews that he did with the media. People went off on me saying, that's not true at all. Jimmy was all in on Chicago. He loved this team and wanted to be there. And then I saw a tweet that you put out, maybe it was like a week or so after, and it kind of resonated with what I was saying. It was about how, hey, we don't really know the whole story. You meaning you were there, Stacey King, you were watching, covering the team every night, every possession. You're going to have more of an inside scoop than we ever will. What were your thoughts on Jimmy's final year in Chicago before being traded? And do you think that it actually made sense for the Bulls to trade him, or could it have potentially worked out in the Bulls building around him?
Well, we live in a world, hindsight's 2020.
Right.
Jimmy was an all-star here. Jimmy was a big reason, why the Bulls were having success, especially after having all the injuries to the key players like Joakim Noah and Derrick Rose. He stepped up. This was a homegrown kid. This kid was only getting, 8 minutes a night as a rookie, had to work his way into getting minutes coming off the bench as a starter, was the most improved player. So he deserved all the accolades that he got when he was here. And I'm a big Jimmy Butler fan, a huge Jimmy Butler fan. Yeah. But the trade had to be made. There was things going on behind the scenes. And that's what I said in my tweet. A lot of times fans just see the topical things. They don't see what goes underneath the deep, crevices of things. Jimmy was unhappy. Jimmy was unhappy here. And he was doing things that made very difficult, for the Bulls. And they had to make a move, and people say, oh, it's easy to say the Bulls lost that trade. No, they really didn't lose that trade. I mean, at that time they won, because if you go back and you see Jimmy's time in Minnesota, it was it was a destructive time, it was kind of a carryover to what we were seeing kind of, festering here in Chicago. Minnesota finally got the Hurricane Jimmy, and, and that disrupted their team. But if you look at what we got Zach Lavine, who turned out to be an all-star here. Okay. We got Lauri Markkanen, who's turned out to be a super player now, in Utah, but had potential to be an all-star player here. And that's another story. But, and then Chris Dunn. I mean, we got 3 really good quality players at that particular time for a player who was still, an all-star caliber player, but was kind of starting to feel himself a little bit, kind of getting the big head. And that was one of the reasons why it didn't work here. It didn't mean Jimmy's not a good player or a great player or a great person. It was the fact that, he had some, he wasn't getting along with certain people. And, and so that caused a lot of problems. And then everything that we're talking about now, you saw come to fruition. In Minnesota, blew up, disrupted the team, goes to Philadelphia. What happens there? He's on a playoff team. He's on there with other superstar players. What happens there? Blow ups, doesn't work. They get rid of him. The perfect landing spot for him, if you would ask me and say if there's one place Jimmy would really prosper, I would say Miami. That would have been the perfect place for them because they have a culture that's been established for over 25 years with Pat Riley, and it's carried over. They do not allow the players to run the asylum. It doesn't work that way in Miami. The players have so much power now in this league. They're demanding trades. I want to go here. Give me my money first, but then trade me here. I don't want to play here anymore. They're dictating where they go. And I'm an ex-player. You know, I'm always pro player. I'm always going to support the players. But at some point, the organizations have to get control of what these players are demanding and what they're doing. At the end of the day, you know, you got a job to do. You know, if you're working a 9 to 5, you could come in there and demand more money. You could demand to be advanced, move up in the company. If the company's going to do it, they're going to do it. If they're not, they're not. Most likely, you might get fired for coming there demanding things. So NBA is a little bit different because you're talking $100 million players. And those guys have so much control now. But in Miami, it doesn't work that way. That's why LeBron James is still not there. James, if LeBron James was able to have the control like GM LeBron James that we've seen in Los Angeles and Cleveland, he didn't have that type of control in Miami. Pat Riley would never relinquish that type of control to a player. Eric Spoelstra is a disciple of Pat Riley. It's his right-hand man. And when you have the backing of the owner, Mickey Arison, you have the backing of, you know, the general manager, president, Pat Riley, you're not going to lose, you know, and what you're seeing, and you saw Jimmy Butler get into an argument with Eric Spoelstra in front of everybody. Okay. You didn't see Spoelstra back down. You didn't see Spoelstra going, calm down, Jimmy. All right, I'll let you have your way. Spoelstra like basically threw the clipboard down and said, let's fight. Like he let Jimmy know, and Udonis Haslem, who's also there, who's been in the Heat culture for a long time, they stood up to Jimmy and said, hey, no, bro, this is not going to happen. You're not going to do this on our team. And Jimmy snapped back, and what happened? Their whole season turned around after that. They were a different team after that situation. So as far as the Bulls concerned, no, they didn't lose that trade. And people who say they lose that trade, you know, is just basically going, what has Jim done since he's been in Miami? But the first two stops, you would say the Bulls had won that trade.
Yeah. Well, I remember after, you know, he went to Philly, after the Wolves had traded him, everyone was talking about how the Bulls won that trade, right? Because they were seeing what had happened. And I've kind of always said this. I mean, Jimmy had to be in the perfect system for him as a player. And he found that in Miami. And he wasn't going to get that in Chicago. Like, as much as people like to say, well, the Bulls could have just built around him, I don't really see it, especially under Gar Pax. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seemed like he didn't like Fred Hoiberg. I mean, that was pretty clear. The Bulls were not going to let Hoiberg go at that time because he was still a newly hired coach. I don't see him being able to have worked out with the Bulls as much as we wanted it to happen, right? It's just that the way that his personality just wouldn't have jived with the overall culture that the Bulls have right now. And maybe that's you know, saying something more about the Bulls and they got to alter their culture. But so yeah, I'm with you. And that's the reason why I wanted to bring it up, because everyone was going in on me about that. And I was like, I don't know. This is what I witnessed when I was watching that last season. He did not seem like a happy player. And the Bulls had to make a decision, right? It's like they were.
Well, you look at the coaches Jimmy has had, and he has never had problems with. They're strong personality coaches. They're coaches that demand structure and respect. You go back to his Marquette coach, Buzz. I don't remember his last name, but Buzz had the ball-headed cut, the Army-looking cut. He was very tough on Jimmy. Yeah. Okay, gets Tom Thibodeau his rookie year, and has Tom Thibodeau most of his developmental years here in Chicago. Strong personality, coach that demands respect. You weren't having that with Jimmy. Okay. If you look at the places that he's gone since he left Chicago, you had Fred Hoiberg, whose personality is not to clash with players. He's more of like, you know, a Brad Stevens, you know, I'm gonna let the players police themselves. Well, Jimmy can't have that kind of coach.
Then he wanted to be coached harder. He even said that.
Coached harder. So then you send him to Minnesota, and he's got, you know, the coach there who's not a strong personality guy. Ryan Sanders is not a strong personality guy. Right. And then Thibodeau was the coach first. But Thibodeau was just kind of, at that point, Thibodeau kind of lost control of the team anyway. So, and so that was a problem. Thibodeau didn't have the back end of management, so therefore he just basically wasn't the same coach he was in Chicago. And I think Thibodeau changed his coaching style a little bit based off of what happened in Chicago. The abrasive, hard nose. I think he changed a little bit because when he was out, he probably got a chance to do some self-evaluation and said, you know what, maybe I got to try something a little bit different, and I think he probably changed his coaching style in Minnesota, which didn't probably help Jimmy, because Jimmy felt like maybe he wasn't pushing Wiggins hard enough, or he wasn't pushing Towns hard enough to get them to where they need to go. And so I think that's it wrong with him. And I think when you look at what happened in Philadelphia, Doc Rivers is a guy that pretty much, and no, not Doc Rivers, but Brett Brown. Brett Brown was a guy that, basically let Ben Simmons do whatever he wanted to do because he had a relationship with Ben Simmons' father. He coached him when he was in Australia. And, Jimmy thought that he was soft. And, and then they kind of he paired up with Embiid. And then when he paired up with Embiid, that pushed Ben Simmons out. And so you got Brett Brown now got to make a decision. And then, whether to pay Tobias Harris all this money or you pay Jimmy Butler. Well, they went and said, hey, we'd rather have Tobias Harris. He's not a locker room problem. He'll do what he's supposed to do. He'll play hard. Jimmy's abrasive. Jimmy's a powder keg. We don't know when he's gonna blow, and we don't want him to infect Embiid, to get Embiid to thinking differently. Because now if you get Joel Embiid saying, hey, I want to be traded, which I think that's coming pretty soon.
Yeah, that might come.
I really do. But once Jimmy went to Miami, the culture there was so strong. And plus, they didn't really have superstar players. He was able to walk in there with his work ethic. He was able to go in there and just basically impose his will. And everybody followed. Young players like Tyler Hero, all these younger kids, they were able to follow him. And then he fit the Heat culture. Like he just really loved structure. He loved being coached by Spoelstra. He loved Pat Riley. He loved that environment. Plus he had Dwayne Wade, helping him on the back end, on the side, telling him what about Heat culture and everything. So it worked out, and it's still working out. It's still working out. And, they got to the finals now twice. They got the bubble. Not a lot of people don't want to say the bubble counts, but it does count. It's still the finals. LA still won the title, and they got a ring. They got a banner hanging up, so it still counts. But he's a great player. It'll be interesting to see, this year, what they do to build around him. They're trying to get Dame Lillard, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen because they don't have enough quality pieces to make that trade. But don't count Pat Riley out. Pat Riley will find a way to get something done.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, you're talking about the Heat in this upcoming season. Let's talk about the Bulls. Obviously, the offseason, still ongoing, but for the most part, the Bulls have locked in their roster. They re-signed Vucevic, re-signed Coby, Ayo, brought in Javon Carter, Torrey Craig. What's been the biggest surprise to you so far this offseason?
Nothing's been really a surprise because they made it very clear about continuity. They talked about a lot of that. AK Mark talked a lot about that last year, being able to keep your core pieces together and build around them. The devastating loss from Lonzo Ball really hurt this team. Lonzo Ball, they built this team basically around Lonzo Ball. Let's just be honest. It wasn't Zach. It wasn't, DeMar. He was the really key piece that made this team go. And having Lonzo Ball being out is like having three really, really good all-star caliber players out, because not only do you get a guy that shoots over 40% from the three, he's 6'6", he rebounds, he led your team in block shots. He controls the tempo of the game, and he gets guys easier shots, on the offensive end, much more efficient scorer. Zach was a much more efficient scorer. DeMar's a much more efficient scorer. And then you take the ball, out of guys' hands, and it limits the isolations when he's there because he's quick reading defenses and getting the ball to where it's supposed to be. So I knew they were going to come back. You had to, the Bulls don't have a lot of assets right now, and if you're talking about a complete rebuild, blowing it up and trade this guy, trade Zach, get rid of DeMar and, get rid of Vooch, you're setting yourself back 10 years. Like, you're giving up And the trade market is, Jamal, it's like you don't know what you're going to get. I mean, I've seen guys. I mean, look what Kevin Durant got, and second round picks for guys like that. You know what I'm saying? You're getting more second round picks now. Guys are not, teams are not relinquishing, their first round picks, their protected picks. They're not doing that anymore. So you got to be very careful, if you're like the Bulls. I mean, they're building around their core guys, and they got to make a decision on DeMar whether they're going to pay him or not. But I think they will. He's too good of a player. And I think that's all going to depend on how they start off this year. Like if trade deadline, if they're in the race and they're like a top 4 team, I don't see them moving DeMar, but if they're a team that's like barely 500, because you got to do something, because you can't let him walk for free. You can't let him go and not get anything back in return. So I think, everything will be based on how this team plays in the first month or two of the season.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, right? How do you think the front office should measure success this season? Because I think most would agree that if the team comes out flat and they basically replicate what they did last season, they finish below 500, miss the playoffs, whatever, say they actually potentially get worse. But where is sort of the line in terms of walking away from this season where the front office can say, yeah, this season was a success, we're going to continue to ride with this crew, or okay, it's been 3 years, we know what we need to do, let's pivot and go to a different direction? What do you think is sort of that line for where they kind of would need to measure success?
Well, me as a guy who sees his team play every night, and I've watched his team play for the last 2 years. There's no reason why, with 3 former All-Stars, 2 current All-Stars, that this team shouldn't win between 45 and 50 games. I'm just being honest. I mean, you've got 3 pivotal guys, which, everybody's into this big three. Bulls have a big 3. You have 2 wing players that are all-star caliber players, and you got a big man that was an all-star, consistent all-star player, in Orlando. So, and he's not, it's not like he's past his prime. These guys are still can put up numbers. So with that said, those 3 guys, plus, you want to see Patrick Williams take a huge leap this year. This has got to be the year that Patrick Williams, and it's not all falls on Patrick Williams. Billy Donovan's going to have to implore offensive sets for him. He's going to have to try to implement some offensive plays for him, not just say, go stand in the corner and shoot threes, or hopefully you get points in transition. You've got to look at matchups. And if he's got a matchup that he can take advantage of on a nightly basis, you got to go to that. You got to get him more involved. Coby White has got to take a big leap. I thought Coby White last year was taking that leap. I thought he played extremely well. I thought he played well in the play-in game, shot the ball extremely well. His handles have improved. His defense has improved. I would not be surprised. I know you got to compete for it, but I would not be surprised if he's not the starting point guard this year. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. I know people go, oh, no, they signed Javon Carter. Yeah, they did, and Javon Carter can start or come off the bench. He's got some games started in the NBA, but, Coby has proven, in the last couple of years that he's a viable 3-point shooter, can stretch the floor, and he can get to the basket now with his handles, and he's cut his turnovers down. And so if he can take that leap this year, along with Patrick Williams, why can't the Bulls? And then, the pieces you got around him, Drummond's got to play more. They got to play Drummond more. Drummond's got to play at least, in my opinion, Drummond's got to play at least 25 minutes a night or more. He's got to. He's too good of a rebounder. He's still one of the better rebounders in the game per 48 minutes. You've got to find ways to put him in the game and get him some minutes, quality minutes, not 8 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes. I think
sometimes a DNP.
Yeah, DNP. I think if you can do that, give Vooch some rest here and there, playing together sometimes in short stints, I think that's going to help the Bulls. And then you got Torrey Craig and Javon Carter, who we named, and we got, Alex Caruso, who's going to do Alex Caruso type things. He's got to stay healthy for us. But the 2 kids, Torrey Craig and Javon Carter are 2 huge additions. I don't think people give these guys enough credit. I mean, Torrey Craig is one of the better 3-and-D players in the game. He's always been that way. You're adding a guy that can shoot the 3. You're adding a guy who's got length that can guard. can defend, two or three multiple positions at any time. And then, Javon Carter is a younger Patrick Beverly. He's a guy that can shoot the ball better than Patrick, consistently, but he's a dog. He's a guy that's going to get up. He's going to harass guards full court. He's going to fight over screens. He's going to do all the things that Patrick Beverly did for the Bulls last year in the second half, but you're going to have a younger version of that.
Here's what gives me hope about going into this season. And I used to have this stat memorized, and hopefully it's still correct. The Bulls last year lost 17 games by 5 points or less. And I think 8 of them they were by one possession, right? And in those losses, the 3-point disparity was huge. And so you'd have to think Javon Carter, Torrey Craig. I know they're not like insane 3-point shooters, but from a volume perspective and from a percentage perspective, it's good. And so even just having a couple more threes here and there, you would hope that makes a difference in 17 losses. Those could potentially, most of them anyway, would be turned into wins. Might be wishful thinking on my part, but that's what gives me hope about going into the season. I guess the question, though, is do you think that if things sort of look like they did last year, do you think this will be the final year of this, crew, this continuity piece? Do you think that the front office would in fact pivot in a different direction? Or do you think that they'll still try, no, we still got these guys, we're going to still try to hang on to it a little bit longer?
Well, I mean, Vuce got a new deal, so he's not going anywhere.
Right.
And Zach's still on his contract, so he's not going anywhere. The only piece really that could move just based off of how the contract is structured is, DeMar. Coby just signed a new deal. Io's got a new deal. They've locked in pretty much, Patrick Williams is coming up. They're going to have to make a decision on him, how much he's worth, but they're not going to let him go. So, I don't really see much change, unless something comes that knocks their socks off per se, that they can say, okay, yeah, we're getting some first round picks and we're getting something quality in return. Because really your tradable pieces that you're going to get anything for, and this is what they're looking at, Zach Lavine, Lavine is going to bring you a lot in return. Okay. So, but if you're the Bulls, you're saying, but yeah, Zach is a where is Zach rated in the top 15, 20 players in the league? That's what you got to evaluate. Where does the Bulls see Zach? Obviously, they see him pretty high. They wouldn't have paid him the money that they did. Right. But I think when you're evaluating these players, not just the Bulls, but, every team, trying to where you're going to spend your money. Where does this guy rank in the top 20 players? And we're paying a certain player like he's LeBron James or Kevin Durant type money. Then you have to make a decision because that's your free agent. And unless you're going to get something in return that's going to say, yeah, okay, that's fair for us. We don't have to spend all this money, but we got good quality in return. We got some draft picks in return because the draft is going to be pretty nice the next couple of years. I mean, there's some really quality young. That Cooper Flagg kid is the real deal. And that's going to be a kid, man, that a lot of teams are going to be trying to, I don't want to say tank, but they're going to be hoping their fortunes are down trying to get a kid like that.
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to attend Bulls Fest just a few days ago. During the event, they had the Bulls Talk podcast live and interviewed Mark Eversley. When they asked him about the offseason, the state of the team, he mentioned that, hey, because the Bulls narrowly were there in beating the Heat, a team that would eventually go into the finals. He added, I'm not suggesting that we would have gone to the finals had we won that game, but based on that, he felt, hey, they aren't that far off. They're almost there. Do you agree with him?
I believe if the three big guys play the way they're supposed to play, I could see that this is a team that can go deep in the playoffs. I don't know if they have enough to win the championships. Let's just be honest. Because you have to be able to shoot the three ball. Right. And if you're not shooting that three ball and knocking it down efficiently, it's tough. But with three guys that are former All-Stars and then, all that are current All-Stars, you should be able to really cause some noise in the playoffs. And you got some good quality young players in, and Coby White and, Patrick Williams. And, you got those two guys, you got some good veterans. Why can't you? I still think, my honest opinion, though, I would have loved to see them get a little bit more size. I don't know. We're infatuated with a lot of guards.
Right.
You know,
No, it's true.
we yeah, for the last couple of years we've been pretty small. I would have loved to see them, go out and get a kid, 6'9", 6'10", to be able to play multiple positions. A guy like Bruce Brown, but with length and size.
Sure.
Somebody that you can plug in at different positions. But the game, I'm telling you right now, the game is kind of shifting. Joker and Denver, you see teams loading up on big guys now, because you're not going to beat that team with one big guy. Yeah. So you see Lakers, trying to get more size and more depth at the power forward and center positions. You see a lot of teams, and Miami, look at Miami, when you look at that series, as good as Jimmy could play, they were just too small. There was no way in the world they were going to be able to Denver would have just had to play awful for them to win. Right. And I think teams now are starting to look and saying, hey, maybe the big man's not dead. We got to get some quality bigs out here and try to find some. So, you got guys kicking the tires on DeMarcus Cousins and, bringing back some guys, so you're starting to see a shift a little bit, but it's still a wide open game. It's still a transition game. It's still a, pitch and shoot 3-point game, but you're starting to see a little bit of a shift now, teams going with bigger lineups.
Yeah. I'll get you out of here on this one, Stacey. Prediction for this season. Where do you see the Bulls finish in the standings? How deep will they make it in the playoffs if they make it to the playoffs?
Well, the Central Division is tough, man. I mean, you're looking at Cleveland. You're looking at Milwaukee, who's the favorite. Cleveland's right there. So those are the top two teams. And don't forget that you got an Indiana team that's going to be much better. You got a Detroit team now. We'll have Cade Cunningham back. So the Bulls division alone is going to be tough. Okay. Yeah. But with this veteran team that they have, honestly, like I'm always going to go high. I'm always an optimist. So if they can win between 45 and 50 games this year, regardless of where they fall in the playoffs, it was a successful season. Mm-hmm. I think they can get past the first round. I think they could be a team that can get to the second round with a chance to go to the third round. But it's going to as man, things have to come into play. Yeah. You got to avoid injury. You got to avoid getting off to slow starts and losing the teams that you're supposed to beat. Yeah. When you get these gimme games, you've got to beat those teams. You got to win those, stack up on those, feed up on those. Because remember, 2 years ago, we stacked up on all the bad teams and we lost to the good teams. Mm-hmm. Last year, we beat all the good teams and we were losing to the bad teams. So somewhere down the line this year, we got to have a little bit of a balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing, right? Is it's like everything kind of has to go right in order for the season to really be a success. But you got to get some luck with injuries. And obviously you got to make sure that you come ready to play every game. Yes. I think that was the biggest frustrating part for fans to watch was it's like, yeah, some nights these guys look great, and then some nights like, what is this the same team? We just want effort. We want you guys to play hard. That's all we ask for as fans.
And that falls on Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan is going to have to, when guys don't come out ready to play, that's why you got a bench. That's why you see teams use their bench during the regular season and their starters are fresh. Starters are, having, these guys play, especially the big three, are a little bit up there in age. Zach, you got to worry about injuries. Zach had a much better second half than he did the first half. And I expect Zach to be 100%, get off to a great start. But you can't play these guys, 82 games, 35, 40 minutes. This is why you have a bench. You got a good quality bench. You got guys like Caruso coming off that's going to demand minutes. You're going to have Javon Carter. You're going to have, Torrey Craig. You're going to have, Drummond. You're going to have options. Dalen Terry's got to figure out somewhere in Io. You've got some depth. You've got to use it, and you got to play guys who are ready to play. If guys not ready to play, they're like, hey, you got to come sit down next to me, and you can be a coach. Why let these other guys go out there?
Yeah. By the way, you were talking about big man. Some breaking news: the Mavericks. I guess not happening. Planning to stretch and waive JaVale McGee.
Oh wow.
Potential. Although Bulls already have their full roster for the most part, I think we all know they're probably not going to go into the luxury tax, but. Potential big that could be on the market. We'll see.
Yeah, that's a big. I mean, I like him. I like him. As a rim protector, shot blocker. He's gotten much better the last couple of years. Yeah. It wouldn't be a bad option. I still think like another like a power forward five, because the
Yeah,
game
yeah,
the
for sure.
game is the game is evolved in stretch fours now playing the five,
Yeah,
playing the five position. You got
right.
Kevin Durant, who's a small forward now playing the five position.
Hmm.
LeBron plays center sometimes. So you need
Right.
that guy like a Jeff Green type of player that can
Hmm.
come in and play a small ball five for you, but he can rebound from the position. That's something that I would say like the Bulls would probably do good if they had something like that.
Yeah, no, agreed. Stacey, as always, cannot thank you enough for being there for us fans, coming on the show, taking time out of your day. You're a man of the people. Wishing you the best of luck in this upcoming season. We'll be watching. We'll hope this team puts out a better product than last year.
It's gonna be a good season, man. I got a good feeling. Right now everybody's excited about the Bears and Justin Fields, and I
Right.
think if they get off to a good start, people are excited about the Blackhawks and their draft pick that they got,
Hmm.
their number one pick they got. This city deserves winners. The
Yeah.
Bulls fans deserve winners, and I think when these guys, I always tell these young kids, man, when you put that Chicago Bulls jersey on, man, it means something.
Yeah.
You're not just playing for yourself and your family and your friends. You're playing for a nation of fans.
Yeah.
Bulls Nation goes outside of
Global.
Chicago. It's worldwide. So,
Yeah.
that's something you got to take into consideration, and, go out there and give a workman-like attitude effort every night, and they'll love you.
Yeah, and we appreciate that as fans. By the way, when you emphasize that, you don't sugarcoat it, right? When the guys aren't showing up, well, you let them know about it, and we appreciate that as fans. So
I'm a man of the people, baby.
thanks, Stacey. Appreciate the time.
Appreciate it, Jamal. Anytime, but keep doing what you're doing, man. You're doing great things.
Thank you. Appreciate it.